Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wellington Branch of Theosophical Society this evening. It's a pleasure to have you here. We'll start with a moment's silence, and then I will do some introductions. Just relax your mind, your body, your emotions. And please repeat after me. Invocation to unity. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom.
O hidden light, vibrant in every atom.
O hidden light, shining in every creature.
O hidden light, shining in every creature.
O hidden love, embracing all in oneness.
O hidden love, embracing all in oneness.
May each who feels himself as one with thee.
May each who feels themselves as one with thee.
Know they are therefore one with every other.
Know they are therefore one with every other.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. So the Theosophical Society was founded to create the nucleus of a new society, a society of divine wisdom where we do not make distinctions of culture, gender, or ethnicity, but rather emphasize the unity and consciousness of the one life of which we're all part. To help us come to that realization, we encourage a study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, and the investigation into the unexplained laws of nature and the powers that are latent in each one of us. The Society has no dogmas or creeds or authority figures, and you're free to accept or reject anything you hear from the platform. So, as our president founder, Colonel Olcott, said, we're all students inquiring into the nature of ourselves and life, and we're all supporting each other in that journey. So it gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce Clive Conland. Clive has been a previous president of the Wellington Branch. He's worked at the national level in various capacities, giving his expertise in administration. Clive comes from a theosophical family, and he is very well steeped in the Christian tradition, and particularly the inner esoteric side of this tradition. He's going to be speaking to us tonight on the symbolism of Easter, and I'm really looking forward to this, Clive. So over to you, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Simon, and the instructions, Sushma. This is the first time I've done a what Simon's calling a hybrid performance or presentation. And as he said, this is about the symbolism of Easter. And as we as Theosophists have quite a different view from perhaps the conventional approach to Easter. Simon said I was brought up in a liberal Catholic family, and that's true, but I was also brought up in the, at least in a Theosophical Society family, but I was also brought up in a liberal Catholic Church family. Now, for those of you who don't know anything much about the LCC, I'm sure most of you do. It was a church that was formed by some of the Theosophists who wanted to be able to maintain their Christian faith and also be involved with their Theosophical Society views. One of those, of course, most prominent, one of the more prominent ones was C.W. Leadbeater, who got pushed out of the Anglican Church for his views, and he subsequently went on to be a great exponent of theosophical principles and investigations. And the great Geoffrey Hodson, whom I'll be referring to later tonight, he was also, he became a priest in the LCC, as indeed was my father and my older brother. Okay, well, the gospel story of Easter, the Passion of Christ, I started off my notes from when some of you might have heard some of this before. I started off by saying that the story is well known, but then I met a young person just a couple of weeks ago, or no, not even that, and I told them what I was doing, and she said, well, I don't know anything about Easter. So that gave me a bit of a shock because I'm assuming that you'll know the details of it, but we'll touch over them as we go. But please don't hesitate to sing out if there's something that I've said that doesn't make sense to you or you aren't familiar with. The theosophical view puts an emphasis on awakening the mystical Christ within each person. And that can be summarized as saying, as St. Paul did to the Colossians in the New Testament, that's chapter 1, verse 27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And that's quite an important phrase, especially for theosophists. Christ in you, the hope of glory. The Gospels are not only a story of external events, they reveal eternal truths. They describe interior attainments or subjective experiences of those who become illuminated. So the story of Christ occurs within all of us, within the soul of us all. The Lord Christ represents the divine in all nature and in human being, mankind, the Christos within, the Christ indwelling, the Logos of the soul, the divine voice. So those are some of the expressions we sometimes hear. The man, the teacher, the Lord Jesus. Incidentally, it's inaccurate to say Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was a Nazarene, as was John the Baptist, the man who baptized Jesus later. The Nazarenes were a Gnostic sect operating for some centuries before the time of Christ. And you might have heard that the Gnostics have been one of the fastest growing sects or groups in the world in recent years, along with Buddhism in the West. So the gospel story, including the Easter story, is the account of Jesus going through what the wisdom tradition or the mystical tradition, what Theosophy calls the great initiations or expansions of consciousness. It reflects also the inner life and initiations of every aspirant on the path to perfection, which we all hope that we'll eventually get along. Initiation is described in the Theosophical Encyclopedia as progressive admission through degrees to an esoteric or mystery school. But here tonight we're referring to initiation of the soul into illumined consciousness. And there are several steps along the way, 4 steps. We're told there are actually 7, but these 4 initial ones are birth, and in this case, the nativity or conversion, baptism or spiritual washing or cleansing, transfiguration or upliftment, and finally, betrayal, the crucifixion and the resurrection. This last is attaining unity with the Godhead, with all. But we'll talk more on this a little later. Easter in the Christian tradition is the most important time of the religious calendar. Well, perhaps I should say one of the most important. Christmas and Easter. But why perhaps Easter gets the nod? Because that's when we see the progression of the Christ, where he's going to, where the Christian tradition, the Christian believers can take hold of things. The 40-day period of Lent, the abstinence to better gain spiritual awareness, which is leading to Holy Week. That's what we're in now. And then the triumphal entrance of Jesus to Jerusalem, his betrayal, and the trial by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor in Judea, Roman governor in Jerusalem. So those of you who take notice of this period, I hope you've all had a nice Lenten period when you've given something up or rearranged your thoughts. So we're gaining spiritual awareness. The crucifixion, the burial in the tomb is the next stage, and the body disappearing. The empty tomb was discovered by Mary Magdalene, and I'm assuming you'll know who she is. Well, in case you don't, she was one of the followers of Jesus. Some people refer to her as one of the apostles, even as some say that the one loved by Jesus, although that's also referred to one of the other disciples. But of course, Jesus loved them all. He knew them all so well. So it was a little bit perhaps diverging to talk about that. Then there was the angel, which appeared to friends and followers, proclaiming, "He is risen." This is used as an Easter greeting by many Christians. Christ is risen, and the response that you give back, he is risen indeed. So if someone says that to you at Easter time, you'll know now what to respond. If you didn't already, you probably do. So the name Easter, where does it come from? It comes from times well before the biblical Easter. The biblical Easter story, and as many of you will know, there was a pagan goddess of spring called Estra or Ostri from the Teutonic region of Europe centuries ago, which is now Germany. She embodied purity, youth, and beauty, as well as the traditional rebirth and renewal concepts which we associate with Easter. Her symbols were hares and eggs, which symbolize the beginning of life and fertility, as you'll know. There was also a Teutonic festival of spring called Oster. So it's all been around for a while. Today's Easter comes from Ostri, the Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring. But beyond that, Ostra is another form of Ishtar, or Ashtaroth, or Astarte, the queen of the heavens. And that in turn, going further back, comes from the Sanskrit us, US, is that the right pronunciation? Us, which means light. From that word springs the title Ushas, the dawn maidens of the Vedas, which you'll know that the Vedas are a large body of hymns and liturgical and philosophic texts, which some scholars say date back as far as 30,000 BCE, before Christ or before the Common Era, as it's now being called to include everyone. Others say it was from 1500 to 900 years BCE. Whatever, it's a very long time ago. So this is why we talk in Theosophy about the spiritual tradition, the truths that come up in all the major religions. They've been around for a long time. Sometimes they just get a bit lost. We just need to revive them, as the Theosophical Society is hopefully trying to do. So taken from its roots, Easter is the great festival of light, of the rising again of the light in the world. The Christian Easter follows the Jewish Passover celebration, Pesach, marking the Jewish people's deliverance from Egypt. And this occurred at springtime. The Hebrew word is Pesha, the Spanish Easter is Pescua, the Italians say Pascua, and the French Pasque. So they're all similar to the Jewish celebration called Pesach. Excuse me. The cross is pivotal in the Easter symbology. And for Christian churches, Western and Eastern Orthodox. So Easter occurs this year on Sunday. I get these dates mixed up. In Western Christianity, the date of Easter is based on the Gregorian calendar and can fall between March the 22nd and April the 26th. The Eastern Christian tradition bases its calculations on the Orthodox, calculations for the Orthodox Easter, also known as the Great Easter, the time of fasting, no meat eating, or no animal products of any sort, fish sometimes apparently. And the Orthodox, they work on the Julian calendar, which differs from the Gregorian calendar by 13 days, and the result is a possible date range from April the 4th to May the 8th. But it's all based on the phases of the moon after the equinox. The Gregorian calendar, that's the Eastern Orthodox, that was created in 1582 by Pope Gregory. The Gregorian is the Western one. That was created by Pope Gregory the 13th in 1582. And the Julian calendar, the one that the Eastern Orthodox use, that goes back to Julius Caesar, 46 BC, before the Common Era. The early Christians of Mesopotamia, the Armenians, were the first Christians to use coloured eggs for Easter. Excuse me. The Greek meaning of Mesopotamia is land between the waters, and that's the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, now most of the areas of Iraq and Kuwait, plus eastern Syria and southeastern Turkey. So it's that area is widely considered by some scholars to be the cradle of civilization. But that perhaps begs the question of what is civilization. However, so that's a lot, it's in a bit of a difficult stage at the moment. It's a pretty unfortunate area. The Easter rabbit came, the Easter bunny, this too came from ancient Egypt. The rabbit symbolizing birth and new life for spring in the Northern Hemisphere. For some early peoples, the rabbit symbolized the moon, and this may have led to the rabbit becoming an Easter symbol because the moon determines the date of Easter. And there's this lovely legend of the poor woman in Europe who dyed some eggs during, coloured the eggs during a famine and hid them in a nest for her children to find. Just as the children found them, a large rabbit sprang away, and so the story spread that the rabbit had brought the Easter eggs. And some of us still have Easter egg hunts around the garden. But onto the second part, the symbolism of Easter, and I have to acknowledge here the great TS teacher, author and clairvoyant Geoffrey Hodson, which is where quite a lot of the material I've got for this speech, this presentation comes from. It's in the spring period, as we've said, in all religions throughout the ages have reflected the rebirth of the sun god. We may describe this as a mighty being known as the solar deity. The theosophical teacher and investigator and clairvoyant investigator, in fact, and writer Charles W. Leadbeater says that this solar deity is to his solar system all that we humans mean by the title God. And there's a quote here, he permeates it, there is nothing in it which is not he. So there you go, God is all. In his book, The Hidden Side of Christian Festivals, Leadbeater says, every one of us will in turn have to undergo the suffering symbolized by the cross. Every one of us must learn how to give themselves up utterly for others, but also for every one of us is the glory of Easter, the resurrection, the victory, the triumph over matter. This victory then, gained by each human over the lower nature, is something which must be achieved in life by every one of us. It's a triumph finally over lower matter and rising out of the darkness and ignorance into the light of wisdom and the higher, purer life. Briefly, just recapping the main points of the Easter story, the interaction of Jesus with Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Jerusalem. The crowd demands the death for the innocent man. Pilate says, I find no fault in this man. And Jesus bears the cross, the passion, the crucifixion, and then the resurrection of Christ. Now, Pilate, he represents or symbolizes the formal worldly mind in the process of illumination. His wife had a dream and told Pilate in Matthew 27:19, for those of you taking notes, if you want to, you can find this up, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. Which always reminds me a little bit of the story about Caesar going to the forum in the Ides of March, and his wife warned him. There's a comedy skit of this where she says, Julie, don't go already, don't go, it's the Ides of March already. So that was perhaps a reference back to this. So Pilate's wife said that she advised him to have nothing to do with that just man. Now, she represents the intuitive faculty that we have, intuition in the symbolism of this drama. Pontius Pilate fell under the blackmail of the crowd, really. They had demanded the death of Jesus in exchange for Barabbas, the so-called murderer or robber involved in an insurrection against the Romans. I say so-called because there is doubt about this. A lot of these were stories that were written up well after the time of Christ. Incidentally, Barabbas is the Hellenization, the Greek term for of the Aramaic word, which was the language that Jesus actually spoke, Aramaic. He spoke Aramaic in the streets. He wrote in Hebrew. But that name Bar Abba literally means son of the father. Barabbas, son of the father. I don't quite know where that fits in for the crucifixion story, but we're told that there were two people on either side of Jesus who were also crucified. Jesus, the son of the Father. And I think some of the religious groups today talk about Barabbas in relation to Jesus. But that's another line for investigation. We can do it another time. So this option taken by Pilate is an illustration of the mind's desire for position or power. He wanted to demonstrate his place in the whole scheme of things. It shows the readiness to betray ideals, The crowd also represents the astral physical demands, the material, worldly temptations. They were more interested in what was going on around them than in listening to what this teacher had to say. So Pilate fails, we'll say fails for that life, because hopefully he would see it again later. Maybe he saw it later in that life. He fails because he panders to the crowd instead of standing for justice and truth. The crowd is crying, "Crucify him, crucify him." And this stands for the lower human attributes, crying out against being disciplined by the inner or higher self. And we all know that that's quite hard to discipline ourselves at times, especially when there's a lot of Easter eggs just there on the side. Should we have them or should we not? If I hadn't thought it would just tempt you, I could have brought some along, but that wouldn't have been fair to the people that are watching from it.
I've got hot cross buns.
Hot cross buns.
Yes. Yeah. Oh.
So, incidentally, the disappearance of these lower attributes in humans is inevitable as the Christ life is more and more fully lived in each human being, each one of us. Pilate washes his hands of responsibility, Matthew 27:24. A state of mind that refuses to respond to illumination. He didn't want to know about it. A mind that denies both conscience and intuition. Pilate's wife's message there. And I think of that sort of person, one of the great philosophers of our current age who visited New Zealand recently. I'm going to forget his name now. Anyway, doesn't matter. But he refuses to. He thinks religion is the opiate of the masses, as it were, and everything is scientific. What I think is, he doesn't want to open to his own intuition. Who is it? Oh, he spoke in Auckland and Wellington just within the last fortnight or so. Does anyone know who I'm referring to?
I mean, the atheist guy that Sheldrake's Genesis.
Not Sheldrake.
No, the other guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him.
I just forget his name at the moment anyway. So Christ bears his own cross, and this must be done. We all bear our own cross. The initiates must accept and meet their own just debts to nature and humanity. Cause and effect, we talk about that in the West, and in the Eastern tradition, it's karma, in the Eastern philosophies. We're told, however, the ordeal is never unbearable. Aid is given. Simon of Cyrene relieved Jesus of the cross in the gospel stories. And this shows that the task of gaining self-illumination, though severe, is not beyond the initiate's power.
What's your Cyrene name?
That's the area he came from.
Do you know where the area is?
It'll be somewhere in the Jordan Valley, somewhere in, I think I would, what we think of now as Israel. Somebody else might know more about that than I do. Tony, you're a scholar of these things. So we come now to the crucifixion. And we're now at Golgotha or Calvary, the place of the skull outside Jerusalem city, following the flagellation at and after the trial of Jesus and the soldiers and the crowd's mockery. This treatment of Jesus is said to be using the skin as a symbol of the illusion of separateness. It is pierced in several places. The spear wound then when on the cross, indicates the final surrender of the self-personality. In the crucifixion, we have two triangles, the symbols of upward and downward triangles. The nails through the hands and feet make the downward pointing triangle. The wound at the head from the crown of thorns with the lower outstretched hands marks the upward pointing triangle. High spiritual power flowing down from the top triangle and humanity's upward aspiration depicted as the lower. And combined, it's the symbol that's used in the TS emblem, as you'll know, and the Star of David, and many other areas where it's called the Star of David, probably more frequently than most. The crown of thorns, the mock royalty from the soldiers, in fact, this crown represents true spiritual royalty. This is not seen, it's not recognized by those who are not illumined. So it is thought of as a crown of thorns. Whereas in this drama, it is royalty of spirit and of spiritualized life in the perfected man, the perfected human being. The spear wound is delivered by one of the soldiers, representing obedience, discipline, and training of the mind, a necessary quality for the Christ to be. The spear wound also indicates the outpouring of the heart, of the inner life and wisdom, and the inflow of worldly actions, the world's evil. So you get the two symbols there. The heart and the inner life, wisdom, and the world's evil, which are seemingly in constant combat with each other. And the teacher, Geoffrey Hodson, GH, he says, hate and evil are voluntarily accepted and then transformed by the true alchemy of the spirit to be later sent out to the world as blessings and as power. It's a fairly profound statement. I'll read that again from Geoffrey Hodson. Hate and evil are voluntarily accepted and then transformed by the true alchemy of the spirit to be later sent out to the world as blessings and as power. This, Geoffrey Hodson says, is one of the characteristic actions of the Arhat, or initiate of the fourth degree. The Sacred Heart, the ever open heart, symbolic of the fact that the Christ to be voluntarily makes himself apparently defenseless before the evils of the world. And this occurs more than once in the life of Jesus and in the Christ. Birth, the nativity, through to the crucifixion. The reed scepter, which was handed to Jesus by the soldier, is said to show the irresistible power of gentleness. The wounded head, the blood and the perspiration flowing indicates a renunciation of egoism and separateness. The head equals the intellect, the surrender of selfhood. Also the complete opening of the mind to all truth and all seekers of truth. The crown chakra, perhaps, you could interpose there. The thirst, Jesus was on the cross, asked for water, and that shows the longing for perfection of the spirit imprisoned in matter. The bitter draught of vinegar on a sponge, which was given to him instead by one of the soldiers, that equates to the betrayal and bitterness, the loneliness and experienced by all on the path at times and accentuated at this level. Geoffrey Hodson says, we may remember that repeatedly we live out these experiences in lesser degree. Eventually, the full realization will be ours. So we don't necessarily go through such a dramatic thing as a crucifixion, but we all must work through this in the successive lives. The betrayal, the blindness and heartless cruelty of the multitude are bitter experiences, but the enlightened one prays, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." So forgiveness is also an ideal for all of us. The initiate knows or experiences at this time the gulf which seems to open and does between the life embodied and the life infinite, the time seemingly of eternity, the quintessence of loneliness and almost cosmic loneliness, Geoffrey Hodson says. All support is withdrawn. Nothing bridges the gulf where this apparently helpless soul hangs. The cry of Jesus recorded in the Gospels arises, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" But this leads to the realization of the individual's unity and identity with the whole, the transcendental discovery that I and my Father are one, which Jesus said and is quoted by John, the Gospel writer John, chapter 10, verse 30. The truth which finally and fully dawns, he is the eternal and the eternal is himself. One and identical with God, the cosmos, for whatever ultimate or universal existence is accepted, and through that, unity with all that lives, all that exists. Beyond the possibility of any sense of separateness forever. It's hard to achieve, but we need to do it. This is the full realization of the individual's unity with the whole, with the divine spirit, the ultimate all, with God, if you like. Then in the mystical powers of the true atonement, which means at-one-ment, this being becomes a savior of the world and can finally affirm, as said a moment ago from the Gospel of St. John, I and my Father are one. Further from Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 28:20, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. So that's a fairly comforting thought. If we feel we need comfort, which we do, I'm sure, most of us. Finally, in this drama, this initiation, he, the Lord Jesus, is resurrected from the tomb of self-separateness and the physical body and becomes free in what Geoffrey Hodson describes as the wondrous Easter of the soul. So although the story talks a lot about that tomb, was it Joseph of Arimathea's tomb that he loaned for Jesus' body to be put in? But it's a symbolic thing that by coming out of that, the tomb of self-separateness in the physical body and becomes free. There's a great, does anybody remember Akabilk? The British, he had a great song, which I quite like singing. I shouldn't perhaps sing it at Easter because it might be thought of sacrilegious. And it sort of has the line of, who rolled that stone away? Who rolled that stone away? who rolled that stone away? Oh Lord, where my Jesus lay. Now we're told that Mary Magdalene was the one who came and found the tomb was empty, and of course her fellow followers of Christ couldn't believe it, but she had that intuition, she knew. So let's get back to the real part of the story for us here. We can see then that Easter is not only the commemoration of something from the distant past, it's a real time of celebration and thankfulness for the victory which human beings have gained and are gaining over that which is the lower, less well developed, the lower self. It is an achievement and a progress of the divine spark, the true person, that it is manifested in each one of us. Every stage is a victory. Ultimately, it will be a victory which makes us more than human, truly a resurrection, arising from the lower to the higher. And as we're told, as we know, there are many who have already realized that magnificent possibility, many who have gone before. It is arising to the level of the Christ Spirit. So the story of Jesus is one of the human becoming perfected. We will all one day reach this level, conquer death and shine forth, as in the New Testament Bible phrase from Paul's epistle to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 13. We will shine forth in the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. It's a pretty profound statement, isn't it? So that's the epistle of St. Paul the Apostle to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 13. We will shine forth in the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So there we are. Thanks again to the works of the Theosophical teachers and writers Geoffrey Hodson and C.W. Leadbeater. And thank you all for listening. And to those of you there,